All right, major breaking news on the third full day of President Trump's second term. To put it simply, the country is now running on Trump time. The president is now promising to look into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Robert F. Kennedy. In 45 days, we could finally have some answers, all the answers. A national security attorney tells us why we might not end up knowing the truth, even with the answers after all. Plus, ICE agents are carrying out raids in cities big and small from coast to coast. Tonight, there's little question about whether mass deportations will actually happen. There are now U.S. troops on the border, an additional 1,500. And the president is wheels up from the White House tomorrow morning. He's set to tour the damage in North Carolina left behind by Hurricane Helene. His plan to get victims left in the cold, quite literally, in North Carolina, fair treatment from FEMA. Little things like housing months after the disaster. With that, we welcome you to the Ferris Network on television. First tonight, the violence of action by Trump's White House over the past 80 or so hours is nothing short of remarkable. That's our Why It Matters segment tonight. Democrats are chasing their own tail because of the speed and vastness of Trump's actions. We make no judgment here about the actions themselves. That's for you to decide. But they are happening at a speed that is unprecedented. In addition to the orders to declassify assassination details, President Trump has signed sweeping executive orders to unleash crypto and artificial intelligence in America. He's pardoned a number of pro-life activists jailed for protests at abortion clinics. Right after that, he responded to efforts to stop his administration's progress, both in the courts and with birthright citizenship. All right, and also is taking on Congress as Democrats try to stall his nominees in the Senate.
Will appeal if they put it before a certain judge in Seattle, I guess, right? And there's no surprises with that judge. The Democrats are trying to delay government, as they always do. They can't help themselves. Even John Ratcliffe, who's very, very strong, very popular, and liked by the Democrats, I guess he gets a lot of Democrat votes. That's taking a long time, and it shouldn't be taking a long time. They're maxing everything out so they can delay everything as much as possible.
Trump's level of productivity during his first week is unmatched. 30 executive orders, 12 memos, 4 proclamations. He's granted executive clemency 3 times. He's already installed 1,300 of 4,000 appointees. He's also spending an enormous amount of time in front of the camera. Since he took the oath, he has talked for 1 hour and 17 minutes and 7 seconds of official remarks. Unscripted speeches and interactions with the press, he's logged 3 hours, 49 minutes, and 3 seconds. That is more time in front of the press in 80 hours than Joe Biden's entire month of January, including his goodbye speech. The president, President Trump's expected to sign the Laken-Riley Act into law after it passed the House. The bill requires the detention of illegal migrants, illegal immigrants, charged with certain violent and nonviolent crimes. The law is named after the 22-year-old nursing student who was murdered by an illegal immigrant in Athens, Georgia last year. He had been arrested twice, but released before the attack. This law would stop that. Throughout all of Trump's actions in office, Democrats have spent the past 2 days with one main attack. They've complained that Elon Musk gave a Hitler salute. He did not. Democrats right now are utterly unprepared for Trump 2.0, and they know it. Stephen Newcomb of Axios got the scoop about Democrats being in disarray. He writes, feud erupts among Senate Dems ahead of surprise meeting. Senator Chuck Schumer is juggling 2 different parts of his caucus. One wants to engage with the GOP on some of its priorities. The other thinks the party should sit back against and fight back against the MAGA agenda. So this is a fascinating twist we are watching play out in real time. Again, no judgment on what is happening. We don't do that here. We tell you what's happening and why it's happening. During his first term, Democrats and the Trump resistance had the upper hand. The Trump administration and the president at times didn't know which way was up in Washington. But now Team Trump is operating like an F1 racing team. Democrats on the Hill are lost in the wilderness, literally. Of all people, the 3 former Obama staffers who make up Pod Save America are leading the messaging movement for Democrats.
Democrats need to show who they're for, what they're fighting for, and then hold Donald Trump's feet to the fire.
If you look at Donald Trump's inaugural day, he did 3 inauguration speeches. The real one, the overflow, the rally at night, then a press conference, right? It
was a reality show.
Yeah. They talk like a message document, and they talk like their pollster told them to talk. And instead, you actually just have to have a conversation like you're having a conversation in real life. And right now, there's like a handful of Democrats who can do that.
Right. That's the truth. Democrats don't really have anybody. They don't have a leader. And they certainly don't have anybody who can match Trump in how they talk. Trump 1.0 was a mile wide and an inch deep at times. He had ideas, but certainly in the first few years, he had no idea how to execute them. It's not the case anymore. Donald Trump loves generals, so we will quote one of the greats. George Patton once said, "A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week." Team Trump had a good plan for this week. They are violently executing it, and it shows. We begin tonight with Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican of Nebraska. Senator, it is good to see you. Thank you. I thought the most interesting thing here was about Schumer, that there is parts of the Democratic caucus that wants to engage with Republicans. What should Republicans be willing to compromise on, to talk about in the Senate to get to 60 votes?
Well, I think you're right that the Democrats are in a bit of disarray right now. And right now, at least in the Senate, what they're trying to do is anything procedural they can to slow things down. What we ought to be doing is looking for the folks that are willing to look for common ground and be able to find ways to do it. As you know, we can pass certain things with just a majority vote, like nominations, like the reconciliation bill. But by and large, anything big that you're going to do outside of those things is going to require 60 votes, and that means getting Democrat votes. So we, as Republican senators, should be looking for those areas of opportunity to be able to find Democrats who have a common interest and working on those. Well, I mean, I got to tell you, if you look at what Democrats used to be for, they used to be for the regular people, right? Now they've gotten caught up in things like letting boys play girls' sports or taking away your gas car or your gas stove.
No, fair enough, Senator, but you guys got together on immigration. You got the Laken-Riley Act. Give me a couple other real principles without shellacking the other side. They lost, you won. Where's common ground?
Yeah, I think actually one of the things that we can find common ground on, for example, is housing. I sit on the banking committee, and we just actually passed out a committee, Scott Turner, who's going to be a fantastic HUD administrator, and both sides acknowledge that we've got a problem with housing. You know, over the last year or a couple years, homelessness has gone up like 18%. Maybe I guess that's the last 4 years. So I think there is an acknowledgement on both sides that we have to do something on housing. And so I think that's an area of common ground where we can find some areas to work on. I think that we all know that we got to strengthen our defense. So maybe there's some areas there because we do live in a very dangerous world. So I think there's areas where we can get Democrats on board to be able to pass some bills that will help keep Americans safe and will help take care of the folks in our country that need to be helped.
Chris Cuomo this morning on his podcast had a phenomenal point as it relates to Democrats holding their fire, saying that Democrats now, at least the most vocal, AOC, others, are engaged in sort of this stupid, nonsensical warfare against Republicans, Elon Musk, Hitler, et cetera. Take a listen.
The reason you hold your fire is because there is going to be ample opportunity to assess the deliverables on the promises, the reality of MAGA, the reality of Trump and what he means for America and what his cabinet does and undoes. Okay? You're going to have plenty of opportunity, and you are compromising the effectiveness and the capabilities of criticism and of counter arguments and debate if you go ugly early, as what's happening right now. And I watch it all over the media. Nobody learned the lesson.
There are certain swing state senators, Democrats, who I think have learned the lesson. Who do you see in the Senate as most reasonable on the other side of the aisle to deal with?
Well, I've been able to establish a nice working relation with Chris Coons, for example. I think there's other Democrats out there as well that we can work with. So I'm looking forward to meeting some of the new Democrats that are coming into the Senate as well, like Ruben Gallego, for example. You might notice that he was one of the co-sponsors for the Laken-Riley Act. John Fetterman's across the hallway from me. I think John and I can find areas where we have common agreement. Israel's one of those. So I do think that what we will be judged by is what we can deliver. And you look at what Trump's doing, right? He's already starting on the border, Maine and Mexico, ending catch and release. He's already going after those violent criminals
he's
there.
He's already claiming victory, Senator,
to bring back your gas-powered
TikTok.
cars.
Take a listen.
Do you have TikTok on your phone?
No, but I think I might put it in. I think I'll get it right now. By the way, again, we won the young vote. I think I won it through TikTok. So I have a warm spot in my heart for TikTok.
Should the president have a warm spot for TikTok and TikTok on his phone?
The president understands we've got to keep American people safe, and the communist China is a threat to our country, and they are using TikTok. And so one of the reasons we passed this bill last year was to end that. If we can get TikTok into the hands of an American buyer, that is something that's going to be good for the national security of our country. And all those small businesses out there on TikTok will be able to continue to use TikTok to grow their businesses. That's what that bill is about, and that's what I think President Trump is going to be very good. He's a deal maker. I think he'll be able to make that deal to get that TikTok property into the hands of an American buyer.
All right. Senator, thank you as always. We appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Great. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yes, sir. Donald Trump promised to reveal the classified information regarding the assassinations of JFK, RFK, and MLK Jr. today. Well, he made that promise, and today he says he's delivering.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades. And everything will be revealed.
But the president tried this once before in his first term and ran square in to the Washington bureaucracy. Back then, the bureaucracy won. This time, he promises it will be different. Mark Zaid is with us, national security attorney, based in our nation's capital. It's always good to see you, sir. Thank you. Is this going to be a little bit like Al Capone's safe?
Yeah. Well, next time you have Geraldo on, you can talk to him.
Oh boy.
I won't remind you. We won't go there. And don't Google it, people. Don't Google Geraldo and the vault.
You're getting me in trouble, Mark.
I probably. This is not going to be what people expect. All right. If we go the conspiracy route, come on. You really think 62 years later that there's going to be a smoking gun document about JFK's assassination? No, there's not. There are about 3,000 records that are withheld. I'm all for it. Grant, I've been fighting for these records for 30 years. I worked with the review board in the 90s. I helped define what an assassination record is or was to get these released. But some of them, I don't think actually the president can unilaterally release. There are tax records. There are statutes prohibiting the release of tax returns, even though those people are long dead, obviously. Oswald, Ruby, familiar names. There are items that were gifted to the United States, like JFK's autopsy records that the family controls, but they're in the National Archives. There are records that probably and are said to reveal assets, human sources we had, the U.S., in Mexico City, in the Cuban and Soviet embassies. And we think 1963 was a long time ago, but if those assets were in their 20s, they're in their 80s or 90s now and may still be alive, or their families.
Sure.
So
you put people's lives at risk that way. And I think this is the important point, because I read the executive order. I'm not a lawyer. And Donald Trump signs it. He holds up, this is the big one, and on and on. But it had a 15-day period and then a 45-day period to work with the Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence. That led me to believe that there was still going to be a wiggle room. This wasn't as easy as him, demanding the files be brought down to the Oval Office and then him handing them over to the press.
One would think that's the only reason why to have those time periods. Now, the 15 days, look, most of these records, they've been reviewed by so many people, the JFK records. It is known inside the government exactly which records are concerning and which are not. And it will be fascinating to see and judge why were some of these records withheld for so many decades. I think that will be more of the big story from a historical declassification, overclassification standpoint, even if we don't get every single record. But the MLK and the RFK records, those are very different. The U.S. government, federal government, never investigated RFK's records. We really don't have any that I know of. And Martin Luther King Those records have been withheld for 50 years. Back in the 1970s, Congress examined and investigated both JFK and MLK's assassinations. The problem is I dare say, what we're going to see in those records, it's not going to be about whether James Earl Ray murdered Martin Luther King. It's going to be very salacious information about MLK's sex life, his personal life, his rendezvous with in affairs and even with prostitutes that the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, monitored. And there are even audio.
Yeah, Hoover wanted stuff on him. All right. Mark, thank you very much. We appreciate the time. And we'll talk between now and 45 days from now. There's really no expert like you in the country on this. We're lucky to have you. Thank you.
And apologize to Geraldo for me, please.
Well, he may be watching. We'll find out. Mark, thank you very much. Donald Trump just pardoned pro-life activists in jail for peaceful demonstrations at abortion clinics. How Trump is rewriting the politics of pardons. President Trump a couple of hours ago signed pardons for 23 anti-abortion protesters. They were arrested for protests like these in front of abortion clinics during President Biden's time in office. The Biden DOJ sought long jail sentences for peaceful protests under the Freedom to Access to Clinic Entrances Act. The pardons by Donald Trump, which will release many from jail, are a clear message before marchers come to Washington tomorrow for the 52nd annual March for Life demonstration.
23 people were prosecuted. They should not have been prosecuted. Many of them are elderly people. They should not have been prosecuted. This is a great honor to sign this.
Trump also pardoned 2 D.C. police officers charged with federal crimes for pursuing a suspect that died in a moped crash. Like many of the things Donald Trump does, he has flipped the script. Pardons are now policy. Whole new ballgame. Joining us now, Mark Halperin, two-way host, author of Game Change. And I will borrow the name from your book that came out so many years ago and convinced me or inspired me to get involved in political reporting. Has Donald Trump 2.0 changed the game, Mark?
He has, and there's a lot of reasons for it. You mentioned one, which is the pardons at the signing of the executive orders. I don't think anyone's ever signed it in front of 20,000 cheering fans in an arena and chucked the pens into the crowd like T-shirts wadded up out of a cannon. Signing these pardons, these executive orders and pardons that are not expected, along with the ones that were. Democratic strategist Steve Elmendorf was on two-way last night. He said it's the 3 A's. It's the authenticity that Trump has always benefited from. It's the attention. He's dominated this week in a way that none of us who've covered Washington and politics can remember. And it's action. He's done more. You know, Trump's prone to hyperbole. But when he says he's done more in 3.5 days than some people do in 4 years, there's maybe, if these things hold, there may be some truth to that, because he's making Reagan look like a member of the deep state. He is changing things in a fundamental way, and he's benefited from 4 years off to think about it.
Well, 4 years off to think about it, and also 4 years off for Stephen Miller and others to plan and to draw up sort of, you know, they were, you know, if they were a mile wide and an inch deep, now they're a mile wide, and then they have the policies behind it. Help me understand, though, the pardons as policy, as an extension of politics, is different, is it not?
Well, I'll say, as I always like to remind people, I'm not here to cheer for Donald Trump or to promote him. I'm telling you, as an experienced analyst and watcher of administrations, the symbolism here is powerful. Some of the things they're doing is changing federal policy, but things like the pardons are symbolic. And Trump is not afraid of being criticized by the Washington Post editorial board or by a prominent columnist. And you saw in most of our presidents, not all, but in most, a concern about what the establishment thinks of them. Trump craves their support, but he's operating now with, as you said, a very long gestating plan. And all of these things they're doing are not by accident. They all have a lot of symbolism to them. Some are dog whistles. but some are shouts to the entire nation. And most of what he's doing, despite what some people in the establishment think, most, not all, but most of what he's doing is quite popular.
Yeah, I think about, older people who were sent to jail for long prison sentences for peacefully protesting outside an abortion clinic. Whether you agree with them or not, there's sort of a fundamental fairness that he seems to be able to harness and fight for right now. Politico came back. The political fallout of the pardons is worth keeping a close eye on. Trump is at the start of his second term, but his last one. The Republicans have a razor-thin majority in the House. 2026 midterms will be here before we know it. Real risks exist for the GOP both now and in the future. These were the same people who told us Donald Trump was done in 2020 and into 2021 or in 2021. I'm not so sure that they understand what the new game looks like.
Yeah, I didn't think much of that piece, to be honest. Look, first of all, from a non-cynical point of view, I don't think it's right to be evaluating what an administration does by saying, well, they risk losing the next election if they do it. I think the right posture for Americans and America is do the right thing. And if it costs you in the election, so what? Use the power you have, use the mandate you have. But as I said before, Trump is playing pure power politics as well right now, 3 days in, but it's true during the transition, as well as any president I've covered. And he's benefiting from not just his side doing well and having a plan to execute, but the Democrats are in a weaker position than I thought. That won't last forever. Trump will have bad days and bad weeks, and the Democrats will begin to come back. But for now, he's taking advantage of an open field run here because the Democrats are not really pushing back very much and still trying to figure out how to talk about what Trump is doing in a way that voters will find compelling and appealing.
Yeah, I think the press also. The typical Washington establishment press is trying to figure that out as well. Mark, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Good to see you, my friend. Take care.
Yes, sir. Guess who's back in charge in large parts of Gaza? We predicted this. Hamas. Mike Huckabee, President Trump's top man for Israel, tells us the new plans to get rid of the terrorists once and for all.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. And I'm also going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. You got to bring it down. If the price came down, the Russia-Ukraine war would end immediately. Right now, the price is high enough that war will continue. You got to bring down the oil price. You got to end that war. I'm also going to ask all NATO nations to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. Our efforts to secure a peace settlement between Russia and Ukraine are now hopefully underway. We look forward to doing very well with China and getting along with China. Hopefully China can help us stop the war with, in particular, Russia-Ukraine, and they have a great deal of power over that situation. Before even taking office, my team negotiated a ceasefire agreement in the Middle East, which wouldn't have happened without us.
Today, President Trump made it clear it is Trump's world, and we are just living in it. Call it the Trump Doctrine. He spoke to the global elite gathered at Davos in Switzerland. The group is a who's who of billionaires, CEOs, and world leaders. They're used to being in charge. Trump's message seems simple enough that he's in charge now. With us now, President Trump's pick for a U.S. ambassador to Israel and the former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, with the disclaimer, here in his personal capacity, not yet an ambassador, now a nominee awaiting his Senate hearings. Ambassador, it is good to see you. There's two parts of this ceasefire, and President Trump has left open the possibility that it's going to fall apart. Despite his best efforts and despite the best efforts of you and other folks working in the region. What's more important, the ceasefire staying together or the hostages coming home or kicking Hamas out of Gaza?
The hostages coming home. That's the most important thing. It's the most urgent because these are innocent human lives. They've been kept for now 470 plus days in horrid conditions, tortured in many cases. And it's time for them to come home. And they're being held not by a government, not by a military. They're being held by terrorists and savages who brutally murdered over 1,200 Jewish people on October the 7th 2023. So that's the first thing. But then Hamas has got to go. There's no way they can stay. I think it's not just a matter of them staying and governing Gaza. They just have to be eradicated because there's no way to ever trust them, to ever successfully deal with them, or to believe anything they say.
No argument in terms of how to deal with Hamas, but we're setting up a dynamic here of bringing the hostages home. In order to do that, at least under the current construct, means a permanent ceasefire, which would leave Hamas in power. And that's what I'm trying to figure out in terms of a policy standpoint for the U.S. government. Is it acceptable to the Trump administration? Is it acceptable to you even that that the hostages come home and Hamas stays in power?
I've heard no one from the administration suggest that Hamas can stay in power in Gaza or anywhere else. I don't think anybody believes that. I do believe that if you look at the agreement very carefully, it says that Israel does not have to stop in its pursuit of Hamas. And if they violate any part of this agreement at any stage of this agreement, not only do they have the right to go in, but they will have the full support and backing of the United States. And President Trump has made that clear from the beginning of all of these conversations. It's just that his getting into the middle of it and letting them know they're going to have hell to pay if they don't start letting those hostages go is the first breakthrough we've had since this horrific thing started.
Fair enough. Also, a lot of reporting, including some of my own, that there was pressure put on the Israelis. And to be fair, when the Israelis feel like they have somebody they can trust, as they do in Donald Trump, they didn't in Joe Biden, they are more likely to make concessions, which they did in this case. And they were more likely willing to step back when they felt like the United States was going to stand with them. To that end, what are you planning? What do you see as the biggest opportunities to use that trust for good?
I think all of us would love to see there be a permanent, peaceful solution, not only in Israel in its main body, but in Judea and Samaria as well. It's a big ask, but Donald Trump did some big things in his first term that people said he couldn't do. He moved the embassy. He recognized the Golan Heights. He recognized Jerusalem as the eternal indigenous capital of the Jewish state. He took away sanctions that were really making it difficult for Jewish people to live in Judea and Samaria. I think one of the biggest things he did, he never got enough credit for it, was the maximum pressure that he put on the people who fund Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, and that's Iran. And by putting the maximum pressure and really making it tough for them to survive economically, he had them on the ropes. And had he been able to continue, I think they would have already fallen apart in their government. But when Joe Biden came in, he did exactly the opposite. He just stopped all of the sanctions against Iran. Next thing you know, they're flush with money, and what'd they do with it? Build schools and streets for their people? Nope, they funded terrorism, and 1,200 innocent Jewish people were slaughtered, massacred 470-odd days ago.
There was something I wanted to get to, but I think I want to stay on this for just 1 second, because you talk about some kind of peace in Judea and Samaria. I would add to Donald Trump's accomplishments were the Abraham Accords, right? The peace deals with other Arab nations. But he didn't have a lot of progress when it came to the Palestinians, because it didn't really seem like he cared that much, which is an understandable position. You made some news on Fox a couple of days ago talking about a two-state solution. Take a listen.
Do you believe that President Trump believes, and you do believe, that the two-state solution is the future?
No. I think we have to recognize there was a Palestinian state. It was called Gaza. Look how that turned out. You can't have a Palestinian state on top of the Israeli state if the Palestinians continue to believe that Israel shouldn't exist.
Now, when I was there was always the joke that there already is a Palestinian state. That's called Jordan. If you're not going to have a Palestinian state in what you call Judea and Samaria, what's often referred to as the West Bank, how are you going to have a peace?
Well, when I say there's not going to be a Palestinian state, there could be someday, but it's going to be when the Palestinians quit saying that Israel should be annihilated.
Okay,
fair enough. They no longer acknowledge Israel on a map, and they refuse to quit teaching children that to kill a Jew is a glorious thing, and if you do it, you'll get a street or a school named after you.
Or square,
There's
whatever.
got to be a
fair
cultural
enough.
shift.
No, fair enough. This caught my eye today, not on the topic of the Middle East, but on what's been happening to conservatives. I know you've been talking about this for a long time. Donald Trump at Davos talking to the CEO of Bank of America. Take a listen.
I hope you start opening your bank to conservatives, because many conservatives complain that the banks are not allowing them to do business within the bank, and that included a place called Bank of America. They don't take conservative business. And I don't know if the regulators mandated that because of Biden or what, but you and Jamie and everybody, I hope you're going to open your banks to conservatives, because what you're doing is wrong.
And just like that, Bank of America put up a statement on their Twitter feed. Bank of America serves more than 70 million clients. We welcome conservatives. We would never close accounts for political reasons and don't have political litmus tests. Fact check, maybe true, maybe not. But broad picture here. You and I talked a lot during the first Trump administration. Are you sensing the same thing I am, which is a massive change in business, tech, entertainment, culture, in terms of how they view Donald Trump and conservatives?
Oh, unbelievably so. Look at the platform the other day at the inauguration. I had to do a double take and say, wait a minute, this isn't the DNC. This is Donald Trump's inauguration. But here's what the reality is. People who are in business realize Donald Trump is going to be good for business. He's going to be good for advancing technology. He's going to be good for opening up for free speech. If you think about it, who wouldn't be for a robust economy that helps the people, not just at the top, but also really empowers people at the bottom who can get their earning power back when inflation goes away and when their energy prices go down and they can afford to put gas in their car and heat their homes? This is everybody wins kind of solution. And you got to love Donald Trump for going to Davos, or not going, but speaking to them and just saying to their faces what all the people are thinking, but he has the guts to say it. Yeah. And I just find that so refreshing.
Yeah, there was, you had to smile a few times. I'll leave it at that. Governor, it's good to see you as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Leland.
All right, we first wrote about this in War Notes. That's our daily newsletter. Comes out just after 4 p.m. Eastern. Insights and analysis on the top stories of the day. You can respond with your thoughts. We read them all. Warnotes.com to subscribe for free. Also see you on social media at Leland Vittert. The Oscar nominations were announced today, and the big winner is a musical about a trans Mexican drug dealer. Why Hollywood would rather lose its star power than give up DEI. Cut deals. Washington Post now tells stories that, quote, all Americans care about. Wonder where they got that. Athletes do the Trump dance on the sidelines. Carrie Underwood performed at the inauguration. There is, though, just one industry that has not quite gotten the message. That would be Hollywood. Earlier today, the Oscar nominations came out. Some of you may have missed this. I sure did. And there's a reason for that. The most nominated movie this year is Emilia Perez. It is a Mexican trans crime musical. And as you will see, I'm not kidding.
Hello, very nice to meet you. I'd like to know about sex change operation.
I see. Men to woman, or woman to men.
Man to woman.
From penis to vagina.
I feel like I have to apologize to my mother. That right there received 13 nominations. The same number as Forrest Gump and Gone with the Wind, for those keeping count. Hollywood used to lead the way in America with films like Gentleman's Agreement, putting a spotlight on anti-Semitism. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? In the Heat of the Night, leading to some serious conversations about race and civil rights. Now Hollywood gives us North Korean DEI propaganda starring trans drug dealers. It's shocking that nobody is watching movies anymore. Batya Ungar-Sargon's here, opinion editor for Newsweek, author of Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. Batya, for some reason, I don't think you're surprised.
I can't believe that's a real scene from the movie. You're having us on, Leland, right? I mean, that can't be real.
I am told that, as I said, my apologies to my mother who is watching, but...
Listen, the people making culture today are complete and utter cowards. This is what the woke mindset did. It took a worldview based on right versus wrong and replaced it with a worldview based on powerful versus powerless, and said if you have less power based on the woke binaries of gender or race or what have you, you are inherently virtuous. And what that means is that if you don't belong to one of those groups, you do not have a right to an opinion. You don't get to say, this is good and this is bad. This is quality. This is terrible. They have used these, marginalized identities as a shorthand for quality or for virtue, and that's how you end up with crap like this.
What I think is so interesting is they had to legislate it, right? Which is that in order to be considered for an Oscar, and we're showing pictures right now from one film that also got nominations, which was a movie about Donald Trump. The trash is Trump, so of course it got nominations. But Oscar representation and inclusion standards. One or more lead actors must be from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. The main storyline of the film is centered on an underrepresented group. At least 2 of the crew leadership positions must be filled by women, a racial or ethnic group, LGBTQ people with disabilities. In other words, they are sort of, I don't want to say mandating this, but they're mandating it at the expense of profits. Oscar viewership plummets. 1998, when the Titanic won, $55 million. 2023, $19.5 million. That's going to keep going down because it keeps becoming irrelevant. Why is woke more important than money to these people? And they seem to be the only ones.
They absolutely hate average Americans. They hate the working class. They hate middle class values and aesthetics. So the viewership, they hate them. Everything that regular people hold dear, merit, hard work, love of family, the nuclear family, their nation, their neighbors, all of this stuff is anathema to the elites who live under this woke worldview in which all of those things are bad and evil because they're part of, white supremacy or part of the majority culture. And so they literally hate the things that make stories that people want to see. It's a real hatred of the working class, the utter contempt that they have for people who work with their hands. It's dripping off of every single one of these movies.
So here's the question. Should we talk more or just play one more clip for everybody?
No,
from
let's
Wicked?
play it.
Here we go. Roll the clip.
I've seen this week people are taking the lyrics of Defying Gravity and really holding space with that and feeling power in that.
I didn't know that was happening.
I've seen it, yeah.
That's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that was happening.
I've seen it on a couple posts. I don't know how widespread, but, I am in queer media.
Yes, that was an actual clip from an interview on Wicked. I'm so shocked that the cast didn't want to come on with us. Batya, thank you very much.
Thanks, Leland.
Yes, ma'am. For months, victims of Hurricane Helene, real people, real Americans, not the people Hollywood is making movies about, lived in tents through bitter cold in western North Carolina. Will Donald Trump's visit tomorrow finally bring the help that FEMA has long promised? Brian Enton on the ground for us in western North Carolina. We'll talk to him in a minute. Goes to North Carolina, then California to see firsthand the difference in response and aid to the floods from Hurricane Helene and the wildfires in California. To borrow a phrase, it has been night and day. In western North Carolina, victims were living in tents for months through the brutal winter. They are finally getting RVs and FEMA housing just days after Donald Trump's inauguration. Brian Enton joins us from western North Carolina, just ahead of Donald Trump's visit. Are we to believe it's a coincidence Trump's about to come to town and things get better for these folks?
Look, I think some of it's coincidence. Some of it seems like there was a directive that went down, especially with the people who are staying in hotels. They thought they were going to get kicked out, and all of a sudden there's been this big extension. That certainly doesn't seem like a coincidence. But people here, as you said, they've been suffering, Leland. They feel like they've been ignored. All in these little towns outside Asheville, there are families living in RVs and trailers just like this one. Things that are donated. There was a family in here. They actually just moved out because of black mold. They moved into a different trailer. But I wanted to show you, Leland, how cold it is here, which is a whole nother issue. You see the thermometer in there. It's under 30 degrees in this trailer. Granted, a lot of people will have propane heaters, but the problem has been it's difficult to get propane. So they'll run out of propane and they'll have to spend a couple of nights without heat, and you see how cold it is in the trailers. I met one woman today. Her name is Christine. She's living in a hotel room with her 2 grandkids. I'll take a look at what she told me.
The water was so strong it bent these steel beams around that tree. But this is the destruction of my home, this right here.
What goes through your mind when you come back out here and see all your stuff like this?
It's horrible. This is family property. My father gave me this land.
What are the biggest frustrations with FEMA?
Just having to wait. Our little community is not, in my opinion, important to the nation. Careful, because this floor dips in too.
It's so cold out. I mean, is it hard to keep these warm?
Of course. They're not built for winter. We have heaters, little heaters.
I don't think that's going to do it, though.
You do what you got to do to survive. So
Christine, who you saw there, she was supposed to be out of her hotel tomorrow. Her FEMA voucher was expiring, and it's now been extended for about 2 more weeks. She's hopeful that when Trump comes tomorrow, he'll have some kind of announcement about additional resources here, because they need them so badly, Leland.
For folks that you've talked to, is it political, or is it just about who will help them?
Look, I mean, a lot of the people I talk to are not even political at all. I mean, yes, there's a lot of Trump supporters out here, but there's also a lot of people who aren't even into politics, don't really follow it much. They live up in the mountains because they don't want to think about it. And I think they just don't understand, like, where the help is. They see hurricanes that happen in other states. They see, even like with the wildfires, people are frustrated when they heard that they were going to 100% rebuild there. They just don't understand why they haven't gotten that kind of attention here in Western North Carolina.
Yeah, well,